crisp wind swept across the snow-blanketed shore of Hudson Bay, stirring up tiny snow devils that whirled along the deserted road. In the distance, a lone polar bear wandered through the frosted twilight, disoriented under the flicker of porch lights in Churchill, Manitoba. At first glance, the sight seemed almost dreamlike, an icon of the frozen north stepping timidly onto human turf. Little did anyone know, this midnight visitor would set in motion a powerful tale of compassion and courage. It would test the bravery of one local man named Jonas Harrington, forging a bond between man and beast, an unforgettable encounter. Neither would ever forget. Churchill, Manitoba, often dubbed the polar bear capital of the world, was accustomed to sightings of these majestic creatures near town. But typically, they appeared in certain seasons or in the distance by the coast, roaming the sea ice in search of seals. Encounters up close, right at people's doorsteps, were far less common and certainly less welcome. On this particular evening, the temperature hovered just above -20 degrees Celsius, and the moon cast a faint silver glow over the endless snowfields. Clusters of brightly colored houses huddled together as if for warmth. The few streetlights flickered, their halos blurred by drifting flakes. It was a serene winter scene until the bear appeared. News traveled fast in a small place like Churchill. People often monitored each other's well-being through quick phone calls or casual checks from front porches. That night, one of Jonas Harrington's neighbors, Patricia, had been out near her fence and glimpsed a large shadow moving unnaturally close to the row of houses facing the bay. She caught the glint of black eyes and the slow sway of powerful shoulders. Concerned, she called Jonas, knowing he had a reputation for practical thinking and a decent knowledge of polar bear behavior, having volunteered some years back with the Polar Bear Alert program. Jonas was a tall, lean man in his mid-40s, with dark hair peppered by the rigors of a northern life. He had grown up in Churchill, building a quiet admiration for the region's wildlife and its stark, unforgiving beauty. He had once dreamt of becoming a wildlife biologist, but life took him in another direction, caring for his elderly parents and taking a position at the local supply depot. He had never lost his fascination with the Arctic's most iconic mammal. When the call came, Jonas was at home preparing dinner for himself. A fresh pot of tea sat steaming on the counter. He pressed the phone to his ear, hearing Patricia's trembling voice. She told him about the polar bear, how it seemed more confused than threatening, and that it was dangerously close to houses. More concerning still, it was near the yard where her grandchildren came to play. A situation like that could spiral quickly if people panicked or if the bear felt trapped. Jonas slipped on his heavy parka, boots, and gloves. He stepped onto his porch, heart pounding beneath the layers. The cold air bit at his face. Somewhere a dog barked. The stillness of the town felt tense, as if it too sensed the unusual presence. He hesitated. Normally, a call to conservation officers was the immediate response. But he also knew that if a bear was deemed a serious threat, it might be tranquilized and relocated, or worse. If the situation escalated, he decided to see for himself first. Perhaps he could keep things calm until the professionals arrived. With flashlight in hand and nerves alight with adrenaline, Jonas strode into the frozen night, determined to help the bear and protect his neighbors. Stepping beyond the circle of light cast by his porch, Jonas felt a surge of both dread and awe. He'd seen polar bears many times, of course. The entire region was known for them. But never had he ventured out at midnight, alone, with the distinct mission of confronting one that seemed lost among people's homes. The night sky overhead was star-strewn, and each exhalation created a crystalline cloud in the freezing air. Jonas followed the trail that meandered between a cluster of small houses and drifted snowbanks. Each step crackled. On quieter nights, that sound might have felt soothing, but now it felt ominous. Every nerve in Jonas's body was tuned to his surroundings. He listened for movement, for the telltale crunch of giant paws on snow. The wind gusted, momentarily stealing his breath and scattering the beam of his flashlight. Rounding a corner, he saw something that made his heart jolt. Several houses away, beneath the dim glow of a solitary street lamp, stood a polar bear, its white fur blended with the backdrop of snow, except for a faint golden halo from the lamplight. Jonas's flashlight caught the reflection in the bear's eyes, and for an instant, man and bear locked gazes. It was impossible not to feel the primal connection, an ancient bond that had existed since humankind first ventured into these frozen lands. The bear was large, possibly a sub-adult or young adult, maybe 8 or 9 feet tall on its hind legs, though Jonas couldn't be certain at this distance. It seemed disoriented, sniffing the air, turning its head as though searching for something familiar. Its breath was visible in the cold streaming from its massive jaws. Jonas recalled hearing that the sea ice had been forming later each year. When the ice was too thin for safe hunting, some bears grew desperate, wandering further inland in search of food. That might explain why this one was ambling near houses. Hunger, confusion, or perhaps it had just lost its way. Regardless, the presence of a bear so close to people was dangerous not only for the humans, but especially for the bear itself. One wrong move, and it might end up in the polar bear holding facility, or worse. A door creaked open behind Jonas. He turned to see Patricia peeking through the crack, fear in her eyes, but also relief that Jonas had arrived. He lifted a hand, signaling for her to stay inside. Slowly, carefully, he inched closer to the bear, hoping to keep it calm until he could figure out the next step. His breath came in short puffs, adrenaline surging with each step. The polar bear continued to sniff the air, lured perhaps by the faint odors of garbage bins or cooking scents wafting from homes. The tension was palpable, the distance between them shrinking to a precarious measure. Jonas's heart pounded. He thought back to the safety briefings he had once attended. Never run, never show fear. Keep your voice calm, make yourself appear steady. Above all, do not provoke. Keep the bear from feeling cornered. He raised his voice quietly, trying to sound firm yet gentle. Easy now. You're all right. We don't want to hurt you. The bear exhaled a plume of steam and lowered its massive head to the snow, as if sniffing a trail. Jonas could only hope that he might somehow guide this majestic creature away from the houses and back toward the open tundra. At that moment, neither man nor bear fully understood the journey that lay ahead, or how the experience of that single night would forever bind their fates. The street lamp cast a sparse glow that flickered with each icy gust of wind. Jonas stood about 20 meters from the bear, his pulse roaring in his ears. Somewhere in the distance, a siren sounded, perhaps the local officers responding to another call, or some mechanical squeal carried by the wind. The polar bear turned its head sharply at the noise, tension rippling through its hulking shoulders. Jonas hesitated. Approaching the bear too quickly could be seen as a threat. Backing away suddenly might draw the bear's curiosity or predatory instincts. Carefully, he reached into the side pocket of his jacket and withdrew a small air horn. It wasn't much, but it was standard gear here. A short blast could deter a curious bear, discouraging it from inching closer to residential areas. His breath rattled with nervous anticipation. Still, something in the bear's posture struck Jonas as oddly forlorn rather than aggressive. Its ears weren't laid back in the classic sign of a defensive posture, nor was it baring its teeth. It kept glancing around as if it were searching for a path home, away from this strange labyrinth of human dwellings. And Jonas, in his gut, felt an almost magnetic pull to help. He spoke again, soft words carried by the wind. "Easy there. You're lost, aren't you? Let's get you back to the bay." It was absurd to think a few words could soothe a polar bear. Yet for Jonas, speaking felt necessary. Perhaps it would calm his own nerves more than anything. If the bear recognized his voice as something other than a challenge, that was a bonus. The bear swung its massive head to face him fully. Its eyes reflected the moonlight, shimmering with ancient intelligence. Jonas felt as though he were peering into a living piece of the Arctic soul. For a second, fear pulsed hot in his veins, but then a profound sense of wonder overtook him. In that silent exchange, man and bear existed in the same breath, two living beings caught in a precarious dance of respect and caution. Jonas took a slow step sideways, not forward, angling himself so the bear had a clear path away from the homes and toward the open tundra. He lifted one arm slowly, pointing his flashlight beam away to avoid shining it directly in the bear's face. His other hand fingered the horn, ready to press if the bear charged. But there was no immediate aggression, just curiosity and that lingering sense of confusion. A door slammed somewhere behind them, causing the bear to jerk. Jonas froze. Heart hammering, he waited for the bear's reaction. The bear huffed, nostrils flaring. Jonas whispered under his breath for whoever had made the noise to stay inside, praying they wouldn't startle the creature further. Slowly, the tension ebbed once more. The bear took a few tentative steps back, as if giving Jonas space. In that moment, Jonas recalled the old tales his father told him, tales of the region's first inhabitants, who believed that humans and polar bears shared a sacred bond, both relying on the ice, the land, and the rhythms of an unforgiving environment. Jonas had always found those stories comforting, but he never imagined he'd be playing out a modern version of them, face to face with a wild bear. Tonight they would test those ancient bonds. Jonas held his breath, steadying his nerves, quietly grateful that so far the encounter had not turned deadly. But he knew he had only taken the first step in guiding the bear to safety, and that a long journey awaited them both before the night was through. Overhead, the stars twinkled like shards of ice. The only other illumination came from scattered porch lights and a single lamppost that glowed in a halo of fluttering snow. Jonas continued his sideways movement, giving the bear ample space. With each cautious step, he seemed to be drawing the animal's attention away from the line of houses behind them and toward the vast tundra that stretched into the darkness. Fear lingered, heavy in the air, but so did a quiet, fragile trust. When Jonas paused, the bear too paused. When he took a step, it took a step or two. There was a surreal fluidity to it, as if both man and bear were participants in a cautious waltz. Jonas prayed no one else would venture outside. The last thing he needed was someone panicking and taking a shot at the bear, or trying to scare it off in a way that would escalate the situation. Polar bears might be fierce, but they were also threatened by the changing climate and habitat loss. A single bad encounter often meant a tragic end for the animal. Patricia peered through her window. Jonas could imagine her trembling hands parted the curtains in fear and concern, half hoping for some signal that the bear was leaving. Meanwhile, a row of other windows glimmered with the reflections of onlookers. It was impossible to hide a polar bear from an entire neighborhood, and the hush of the street told Jonas that all eyes were on him now. The crunch of snow behind him startled Jonas. Whirling around, heart pounding, he saw the outline of a figure stepping tentatively into view. It was Elijah, a friend of Jonas's from high school, now working as part of the local volunteer patrol. Elijah raised a hand, holding a large flashlight, and they locked eyes. Jonas motioned for him to stay still. With slow deliberation, Elijah approached to stand a few meters behind Jonas, offering moral support but letting Jonas handle the lead. "How's it going?" Elijah whispered, eyes flicking to the bear. "Better than I'd expected," Jonas whispered back. "It doesn't seem aggressive, just confused." Elijah nodded, scanning the street for any sign of a conservation officer or police unit. Their official involvement would be inevitable, but for now, Jonas's calm approach seemed to be preventing a crisis. As the bear continued to pivot its head between Jonas and Elijah, Jonas began a low, soft humming sound, an old trick he'd heard from an Inuk elder in town. Though the exact effect of the sound on bears was uncertain, some people swore that a consistent, non-threatening noise could keep them calmer than sudden shouts. The bear's ears twitched. Its breathing slowed. Together, Jonas and Elijah gently guided the bear away from the homes. It wasn't a perfect science. At times, the bear would pause to sniff at garbage bins or glance back as if second-guessing its direction. But gradually, step by step, they led it toward the open expanse of snow beyond the last row of houses. Wind kicked up again, stinging Jonas's cheeks and cutting through the folds of his jacket. The night was brutal, with temperatures that could chill a person's bones in minutes. Yet Jonas's focus remained on the bear, that solemn, powerful creature who had come so dangerously close to a human settlement. Behind them, lights blinked off in a slow wave as neighbors realized the polar bear was indeed moving away. Some would keep vigil from their windows, hearts thumping until the drama concluded. Others might try to get a bit of sleep, trusting Jonas and the volunteers to handle the threat. But Jonas could feel their collective gaze, their hopes and fears resting on his shoulders. With the bear nearing the frigid plains, a glimmer of relief danced in Jonas's chest. Once the bear had crossed the threshold of the residential zone, an eerie calm descended upon the town behind it. Snow stretched out in every direction, resembling a vast, moonlit canvas. The only movement was the slow, methodical shuffle of the polar bear's paws and the steady footprints of Jonas and Elijah a safe distance behind. The twinkle of distant stars seemed to grow even brighter as they left the glow of the street lamps behind. Though the danger to the residences had lessened with each step, Jonas's mind raced with unanswered questions. Where was this bear headed? Would it continue wandering aimlessly, or would it turn around and amble back into town? And where were the conservation officers who would typically respond to such a sighting? A sudden roar of an engine cut through the silence. Headlights from a truck bobbed in the distance, accompanied by the beam of a spotlight sweeping the tundra. Jonas recognized the vehicle, one of the Conservation Manitoba trucks, driven by a woman named Cheryl he'd known for a while. She was a dedicated officer who had dealt with countless polar bear call-outs over the years. Elijah waved his arms overhead to signal the truck. Cheryl brought the vehicle to a halt several dozen meters away. Clad in a heavy-duty parka, she jumped out, rummaging through the back for the equipment, a tranquilizer rifle and a noisemaker pistol. Jonas's chest tightened at the sight. While these tools were sometimes necessary, especially for bears that posed an immediate threat, tranquilizers could be risky, and Jonas hoped it wouldn't be needed if the bear continued to move away peacefully. Cheryl approached, her voice low. "I've been tracking your movements from the other side of town." "You're doing good, Harrington. Thanks for keeping the bear calm." Jonas nodded, eyes never leaving the lumbering figure. "He just seems lost," Jonas said quietly. "I'm hoping we can just guide him back to the bay. The ice is forming, but it's not thick yet. Maybe he can head out to hunt soon." Cheryl's expression was thoughtful. "We've had a few reports of younger bears wandering near the edge of town. The warming season made the ice late. A lot of them are starving. This one doesn't seem aggressive, but we can't take chances. Let's see how it goes." Jonas exhaled, grateful she wasn't rushing to use the tranquilizer. The bear was meandering forward, sniffing, occasionally stopping to glance back. Jonas resumed his gentle humming under his breath, ensuring he maintained enough distance not to alarm the creature. The trio Jonas, Elijah, and Cheryl formed an impromptu escort, shining flashlights on the snow to guide their steps and sometimes flashing them in the bear's periphery to steer it further from the town. The glimmer of the aurora borealis shimmered faintly on the horizon, a ribbon of pale green that hinted at the cosmic grandeur of the far north. Step by step, they made progress. The cold gnawed at their fingers and toes, and exhaustion tugged at Jonas's limbs. But a deeper resolve propelled him forward. Something about this bear tugged at his heart, as if guiding it to safety was more than a mere task, it was a calling. The image of the bear's wide, questioning eyes lingered in Jonas's mind. They seemed to plead for help, to find the route back to the bay that was its birthright. Cheryl radioed updates to another team. The plan was simple: corral the bear, if possible, in an open region away from residences, then use noise deterrents to encourage it further north. If all went smoothly, no tranquilizers would be needed. If the bear refused to budge, they might have no choice. Jonas offered a silent prayer that the animal would cooperate. In the silent hush of that vast expanse, with only the crunch of their footsteps and the distant hum of the conservation truck, Jonas felt a sense of awe settle in his chest. He glanced up at the endless sky, a tapestry of starlight and swirling auroras, and felt a gentle warmth within an odd, comforting presence, despite the freezing temperature. For the first time in years, he felt truly connected to this land he called home, to a heritage that respected the wild, and to this confused, regal creature whose life hung in the balance. As they trudged further into the tundra, memories from Jonas's childhood began surfacing unbidden, weaving through his mind like the soft glimmer of northern lights. His father had been a seasoned trapper in the region, though he rarely took Jonas on expeditions. The old man was strict, believing the Arctic to be no place for a boy until he had reached a certain age. But Jonas recalled how, on rare occasions, his father let him come along. In those moments, Jonas had witnessed the raw majesty of the north, how polar bears roamed the ice floes, how caribou migrated under the shimmering auroras, how storms could whip the snow into whiteout conditions in a heartbeat. He remembered the way his father stood, stoic, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Jonas would clutch his coat tighter, wishing to be as brave as the man beside him. His father's eyes had always sparkled when recounting traditional stories, particularly those that described the bear as a noble creature, deserving of respect. Respect them, and they'll respect you, he used to say. As a child, Jonas couldn't fathom how an enormous predator could respect him, but perhaps it was about the mutual recognition of life's fragility in these harsh lands. And now, after all these years, that teaching echoed in Jonas's heart. These reflections were bittersweet. His father had passed a few winters ago, leaving behind a gap in Jonas's life that felt as vast as the tundra. The memory of his father's funeral weighed heavy, how the entire community gathered at the small church, how the winds howled outside as if lamenting the loss of an old Arctic soul. Jonas wondered what his father would think if he could see him now, guiding a lost polar bear back to safety, neither side succumbing to fear or aggression. Meanwhile, the bear trudged on, occasionally stopping to sniff the wind as though searching for a familiar scent. Jonas suspected it was searching for the tang of salt air that hinted at the bay. Every so often, it would glance back at the humans following at a respectful distance, as if ensuring they posed no threat. They were now nearly a mile from the nearest house, yet still within sight of Churchill's faint glow behind them. Cheryl continued to radio updates, while Elijah occasionally swung the truck's spotlight, scanning the horizon for any obstacles. The bear's pace slowed, and Jonas sensed fatigue emanating from its heavy steps. He noticed the bear's body condition ribs that hinted at hunger, the loose skin around its neck. It likely hadn't fed well in weeks, a sobering reminder of the fragile balance polar bears face in a changing Arctic. Jonas dug deep into his jacket pocket, retrieving a small, laminated card. It was worn, its edges frayed. On it was a photo of him, his father, and a local guide from the Polar Bear Alert program, taken years ago when Jonas was just a teenager. The day they'd rescued another young bear from a snare trap. Jonas had kept it as a talisman, a reminder of his father's lessons about respect and courage. He squeezed it gently in his gloved hand, drawing strength from the memory. A gentle tug at his sleeve brought Jonas back to the present. Elijah was there, nodding forward. The bear had resumed its walk, forging a path through gently rolling drifts. The wind carried the faint scent of brine from the bay. Perhaps the bear caught it too, because there was a renewed determination in its stride. Jonas looked over his shoulder at the distant lights of Churchill, feeling a wave of relief. Part of him knew he had crossed a threshold tonight. Whatever the outcome, this encounter with the lost polar bear was already changing him, rekindling old fires of purpose and compassion that had nearly gone cold with time. Even though they'd made considerable progress, the Arctic night was unforgiving. The temperature plummeted further, as if the midnight hours wanted to remind them all that survival here was never guaranteed. With each breath, Jonas felt the inside of his nostrils sting, the cold air crystallizing against his lungs. Cheryl, Elijah, and Jonas exchanged glances. They couldn't keep walking indefinitely. At some point, they would need to stop and reassess how best to help the bear. Cheryl moved closer, her voice muffled by a scarf. "We're reaching the zone we call the no man's land. Beyond here, there's minimal coverage. We might lose sight of the bear if the land dips." She gestured at the rolling snow dunes ahead. "Are we sure we want to keep going?" Jonas looked at the exhausted bear. It had paused again, its broad paws sinking slightly into a snowdrift. The creature lifted its nose, inhaling the faint whiff of the bay's salt water. If the bear ventured alone across these dunes, there was no telling if it would successfully navigate around the modern hazards roads, rail lines, or other illusions of civilization that might confuse an animal used to sea ice. "How far is the water from here?" Jonas asked. "2 more miles, maybe 3, Cheryl replied. "But the ice near shore isn't reliable yet. If he's weak and hungry, that's a concern." Jonas chewed his lip, considering the entire point of tonight's endeavor was to keep the bear away from town, where it risked being shot or put in the holding facility, and guide it toward a safer environment. But if the ice wasn't stable, the bear could risk breaking through. Alternatively, if the bear wandered further inland, it might find nothing but more desolation and eventually circle back near the houses. "We could call in the net team," Elijah suggested, referring to a specialized team that sometimes used a net gun for close-range capture and relocation. But that often meant sedation. Jonas looked at the tranquilizer rifle Cheryl still held. Sedation brought its own risks. The bear could stop breathing, or it could face further harm upon release if it wasn't fully ready to face the elements. Jonas met the bear's gaze again. It lingered like a silent plea in the dark. He wasn't sure how much his own instincts were guiding him versus logic, but everything in him screamed that this was a moment where compassion and boldness could make a real difference. "What if we carefully herd it along?" Jonas said, "until it reaches a point where it can smell the ocean strongly. Maybe instinct will take over from there. We can use noise deterrence if it tries to backtrack. Keep it from heading back to town." Cheryl mulled this over. "We'll have to be cautious. The longer we stay out here, the higher the risk something goes wrong. But maybe you're right. This bear hasn't shown aggression. Let's see if it'll follow the coastline." The plan formed quickly. They would walk a bit further, making gentle noises to encourage the bear along the faint ridge leading toward the bay. If at any point the bear grew restless or threatened to turn back, they would use non-lethal methods, cracker shells or air horns, to steer it away from civilization. They resumed their journey. Each step was a small battle against biting wind and creeping fatigue. Jonas's limbs ached, but he refused to give in. He kept his eyes locked on the bear's wide footprints in the snow. They told the story of a creature yearning for the icy realm it once called home. In that quiet march, Jonas felt his own hardships reflected in the bear's struggle. How many times had he felt disoriented in life, drifting without direction after his father's passing? How many times had he wandered spiritually, questioning his place in a rapidly changing world? He realized that helping this bear was not just about saving an animal, it was about rediscovering his own resilience. The polar bear, in all its silent dignity, was guiding him toward a deeper sense of purpose. They pressed on, the pale light of stars and the dancing aurora offering faint illumination. Below, their boots and the bear's paws punched rhythmic holes in the pristine snow, leaving a trail that looked almost like a living chain, binding human and animal in a collective journey. After half an hour, the terrain dipped into a shallow depression. Snowdrifts swelled on either side, forming natural walls. The sky above was an exquisite tapestry of northern lights, rippling in silken curtains of green, with hints of pink edging. Jonas paused to catch his breath, enthralled by the celestial display, even as exhaustion seeped through him like freezing water. The bear, too, stopped. It raised its head, gazing at the dancing lights. Jonas felt an inexplicable urge to stand beside it, as if both of them were pilgrims traveling through a land both harsh and sacred. Then a sudden crack echoed through the silent night. Instantly, Jonas's chest clenched. His first fear was that someone had fired a shot, but the bear didn't bolt, just lifted its head in confusion. Cheryl scanned the horizon with her flashlight. Through the swirling snow, they saw the silhouette of another figure stumbling over a drift. "Hey!" a voice called. It was one of the volunteer patrol members, a young man named Jake. He carried a flare gun and a handheld radio. "We just heard something. Could be ice shifting or I don't know." He drew closer to the group, voice quivering in the frosty air. Cheryl frowned. "We need to maintain quiet. Loud noises could spook the bear. Where did you hear the crack coming from?" Jake pointed east, toward a darker patch of land near a series of small frozen ponds. "Somewhere over there. The ice might be giving way under the temperature drop, or maybe something else. Hard to say." Jonas felt a pang of anxiety. If that area was unstable and the bear wandered too close, it might fall through thin ice. He exchanged looks with Elijah, who shrugged, helpless to offer more info. They had to keep moving, but also be mindful of these hidden dangers. The bear took a step forward, continuing its silent progress toward the north. Jonas exhaled in relief. At least it hadn't been startled into fleeing. He nodded to Jake, urging him to keep a watch on that eastern flank. If the bear veered that way, they might need to direct it back using noise. They resumed the slow walk. The wind moaned, drawing swirling eddies of powdered snow into ghostly shapes that danced around their legs. Jonas felt as if they were traveling through a dreamscape, both beautiful and forbidding. The hours were wearing on him. His stomach growled, and his legs felt like lead. Yet every time he thought of turning back, he looked at the bear's ambling shape and found renewed determination. A part of him wondered if it was a kind of madness to follow a polar bear in the dead of night, guided by fragile hopes. But deeper down, he believed they were forging a bond that transcended fear, a testament to how humans and nature could coexist with respect and care. Finally, the wind shifted, carrying a stronger tang of salt. Jonas's spirits lifted. The bay was close. He glanced back at Elijah, who gave a tired grin. The mesmerizing dance of the aurora illuminated the scene, bathing the tundra in a faint, otherworldly glow. The bear tilted its nose high, inhaling the saline air. It let out a low, rumbling huff, as though recognizing home just beyond the next ridge. Yet, as they neared their destination, Jonas couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. The tundra had a way of demanding offerings from those who crossed it. Snow and ice could turn treacherous at a moment's notice. And while the bear's confusion seemed to be lifting, nothing about this night was guaranteed. Still, Jonas pressed on, trusting the silent connection he felt with the bear, trusting that, together, they might overcome the perils of this wild, beautiful land. The final stretch toward the bay unfolded like a test of endurance. Each step felt heavier, each breath more labored in the frigid air. In the distance, the frozen shoreline glimmered under the aurora's rays. Yet the path before them wasn't entirely straightforward. Small ridges and dips in the snow could hide dangerous gaps or sheets of thin ice over marshy ground. Despite the risks, the bear pressed forward, seemingly drawn by instinct toward the salt-scented breeze. Jonas watched its movements carefully. Sometimes the bear would pause, swaying its head as though wrestling with fatigue or hunger, but it always managed to move on. At last, the group topped a slight rise, and below them lay the shore of Hudson Bay, a vast expanse of fractured, shifting ice floes edging the open water. The bay's dark surface rippled here and there, revealing that the ice was far from solid. Any illusions of a solid winter had been shattered by unseasonably warm spells earlier in the year. It was a disconcerting sight, large sheets of ice, but clearly not enough to support a polar bear's full hunting routine. Jonas felt a pang of sadness, imagining how the bear must yearn for the days when the bay froze solid, an endless hunting ground for seals. Cheryl signaled for them to halt. "We're close enough," she said quietly. "We should let the bear make its choice. If it tries to venture onto thin ice, we can't follow. But at least it's away from town." They stood there in hushed awe. The bear trudged down the slope, drawn by the call of ancestral memory. Jonas could almost hear his father's voice, reminding him that polar bears were spirit guardians of the north, beings to be revered for their perseverance in a realm of ice and snow. A gust of wind howled across the bay, rattling chunks of ice together. The bear stopped at the edge of the shoreline, sniffing at the wet, frozen sludge. For a moment, Jonas wondered if it would plunge forward onto the ice or retreat inland. Lost and uncertain again, the tension coiled in his chest. He didn't want the bear to rush onto ice that couldn't hold its weight, but he also dreaded the idea that it might wander back toward town. Seconds ticked by, each one a small eternity. Then, in a slow, almost ceremonial motion, the bear turned its head. It looked back up at Jonas and the others, the moonlight shining in its dark eyes. Jonas felt that familiar twinge of connection, a profound sense that the bear acknowledged their effort and presence. That single look felt charged with gratitude, or at least recognition. Then the bear faced forward again and began to walk along the shoreline, testing each step carefully. It avoided the precarious edges, navigating an unbroken strip of solid ground where the water met land. Jonas exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, relief washing over him like a sudden thaw. A wave of exhaustion crashed upon him, and he sank to one knee in the snow, lungs burning from the cold and the strain of the past hours. Elijah placed a supportive hand on his shoulder, while Cheryl whispered into her radio to confirm the bear's location and that the immediate threat to town was resolved. For a long moment, nobody spoke. They just watched the solitary figure of the polar bear fade into the shimmering tapestry of Hudson Bay, its silhouette merging with the drifting ice and the infinite horizon beyond. In that stillness, Jonas felt an ache in his chest that wasn't just physical. It was the bittersweet realization that though he'd helped guide the bear to safety, the bear's struggle was far from over. Its future, like that of many Arctic creatures, was uncertain. But for tonight, at least, the bear was free from the lethal threats posed by frightened townsfolk, free to follow the call of its nature. And Jonas, in turn, felt a spark of hope within himself, a whisper that perhaps he, too, could find direction amid life's shifting ice. The trek back to Churchill proved just as trying, but carried a different mood. The immediate tension of guiding the bear had passed, replaced by a weariness that settled into their bones. Jonas, Elijah, Cheryl, and Jake followed the same route in reverse, stepping into the footprints they'd left behind. The wind had partially drifted over them, so they had to keep a keen eye on where the ground might be uneven or the ice dangerously thin. While trudging through the darkness, Jonas's mind slipped into reflection. Visions of the bear's uncertain gaze swam through his thoughts. He wondered if it would find enough food, if it might keep wandering until stronger ice formed, or if the warming climate would leave it trapped on shore. Those were worries he couldn't control. He had done what he could, and that would have to be enough. Elijah, ever the good friend, broke the hush. "You did something incredible tonight," he said, voice muffled by the thick scarf around his mouth. "I mean, I know we all helped, but it was your patience that really made the difference." Jonas smiled, though the cold nipped at his face. "We all played our part. The bear didn't seem dangerous, just lost. I think anyone in my position would have tried to help," Cheryl chimed in. "Not everyone, Jonas. Some folks would have just called for tranquilization from the start. You demonstrated compassion and courage. I'm grateful you kept the bear calm until we arrived." Jake nodded in agreement, shining his flashlight on the snowy ground. "We'll report this back to the program. Could become a case study, non-lethal, cooperative guiding. This could help shape our approach in future situations." A swell of pride warmed Jonas from within. Perhaps this experience would not only help that one bear, but also improve how the community handled wildlife encounters in general. His heart felt unexpectedly light, despite the cold and fatigue. As they drew closer to the cluster of houses, they noticed windows lit with a soft glow. Even though it was well past midnight, signs of life still stirred. Some neighbors would be waiting anxiously to hear the outcome. The knowledge that the bear was no longer a threat was sure to bring relief. Patricia's porch light shone brightest, as if welcoming Jonas back from a quest. Soon, they parted ways with Cheryl and Jake. Cheryl would file the formal report with Conservation Manitoba, while Jake returned to the volunteer station. Elijah stuck by Jonas's side for a while longer, walking with him through the quiet streets. The wind had died down, leaving the air hauntingly still. "Want me to walk you home?" Elijah offered, a grin in his eyes. "You look like you might collapse." Jonas chuckled. "I'll manage. Thanks, though. I need some time alone to process all this." With a friendly pat on the shoulder, Elijah headed off, leaving Jonas to cover the remaining distance by himself. Snow squeaked underfoot, the only sound in the hush of the early morning hours. When Jonas arrived at his small, cozy house, he stood on the porch, gazing up at the pale glow of the moon. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by an overwhelming sense of fatigue. Yet he felt undeniably alive, touched by something transcendent that night. Inside, he stripped off his layers, the warmth of the heater embracing him like a long-lost friend. His phone buzzed with messages, curious neighbors, reporters from the local station, friends from the supply depot. But he ignored them for now, sinking into his armchair with a weary smile. Tonight's events had carved a permanent mark on his soul, stirring emotions he had long kept dormant. He had stood face to face with a symbol of the Arctic, guided it away from the dangers of human territory, and in the process, found a stirring sense of purpose he had almost forgotten he possessed. Morning brought a pale light creeping over Churchill, revealing the aftermath of the night's excitement. Jonas woke later than usual, still groggy from the late hours. His body ached, especially his calves and shoulders, but his mind felt curiously clear. He rose and peeked out the window, half expecting to see a polar bear strolling down the street. Of course, there was none, just the usual winter quiet, punctuated by the faint hum of vehicles and the bark of distant dogs. He brewed a pot of coffee, letting its warmth seep into his fingers as he cupped the mug. In the soft hush of his living room, he turned on the local radio station. The morning news confirmed what the conservation officers had reported. A confused polar bear had wandered near several homes the previous night. But thanks to a swift and calm response from locals and the Polar Bear Alert program, the bear had been safely guided away. It was considered a success story, no one injured, no shots fired, no sedation required. Jonas felt a surge of pride mingled with relief. He still worried about the bear's long-term fate, but for now, at least, it had survived another night. Its story might even help raise awareness of the challenges polar bears face: food scarcity, late ice, and the constant risk of human conflict. As the day progressed, Jonas's phone buzzed with messages. He received texts from family friends, co-workers, and even an environmental journalist wanting an interview. Patricia called, her voice bright with gratitude, saying she was relieved her grandchildren were safe. She also expressed sympathy for the bear, thanking Jonas for his calm resolve. The phone call left Jonas with a warm glow, a sense of belonging in a community that looked out for one another and the wildlife they shared this land with. That afternoon, he drove to the supply depot for a brief shift, expecting a routine day. But word had gotten around, and many co-workers greeted him with admiration. They peppered him with questions, wanting every detail of his confrontation with the polar bear. Jonas answered as best he could, but found himself stumbling when trying to put the emotional weight of the encounter into words. It was like trying to describe the aurora to someone who had never seen it. Words fell short. Later, he ran errands, picking up groceries, refilling his truck with gas. Everywhere he went, the conversation pointed back to the bear. Some folks were excited, others shaken. A few even cracked jokes about the bear whisperer, but Jonas just smiled politely. Deep down, he felt that the bear had shown him something precious about humility, vulnerability, and the fragile interdependence of life in the north. By the time Jonas returned home, dusk was already creeping in. The temperature dipped again, and the sky hinted at another spectacle of dancing lights. He stepped outside to gather firewood, pausing to stare up at the horizon. No sign of the bear, of course, but he silently wished it safe travels wherever it roamed. Returning inside, he lit a small fire in the hearth, letting its gentle crackle fill the room. Taking a seat by the flickering flames, he pulled out the old laminated photo of him and his father, the one he'd kept with him the previous night. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes. He missed his father dearly, but felt closer to him now than he had in a long while. He whispered into the quiet room, "Thank you, Dad." Maybe this entire episode was a message from the land, a call for Jonas to reconnect with the values he'd learned growing up: respect for nature, compassion for all living things, and courage in the face of adversity. Last night, he'd found all three burning inside him, keeping him warm despite the Arctic's chill. And in that renewed flame of purpose, Jonas sensed a new chapter unfolding in his life, one guided by empathy, hope, and a profound bond with the wild. In the days and weeks that followed, life in Churchill returned to a semblance of normalcy, if it could be called that, in a place where polar bears occasionally roamed the outskirts. The bear Jonas had guided was not seen again near town, leaving many to hope that it had found safer hunting grounds north of the bay. Jonas, however, felt subtly changed, as though a crack had opened in his life through which a rare, Arctic light now shone. He found himself drawn to the old volunteer patrol groups again, attending meetings where they discussed strategies to handle bears humanely. He even started collaborating with local conservation officers, brainstorming new deterrent tactics that might minimize stress to the animals while protecting the community. Some nights, he'd walk along the edge of town, scanning the horizon with binoculars. The memory of the bear's gaze lingered with him, reminding him that every polar bear wandering this fragile landscape was a testament to resilience and also a warning sign of a changing climate. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Jonas found himself near the shoreline with Patricia and her grandchildren. They had come to watch the sea ice form, a slow but mesmerizing process. The children giggled each time a chunk of ice bobbed or cracked, though Patricia kept them close, mindful of potential bear sightings. Jonas taught the kids what to do if they ever encountered a polar bear: speak calmly, back away, and call for help. He hoped such instructions would not be necessary, but knowledge was their best defense. He also began writing short pieces for the local newsletter, sharing his personal account of guiding the bear away from the houses. He infused each article with reflections on respect for wildlife, the importance of coexisting with nature, and the reality that polar bears were under increasing pressure from environmental changes. His words struck a chord with many readers, spurring conversations about how Churchill could continue to innovate its polar bear alert program and promote safe tourism that respected the animals. As the holiday season approached, icy winds swept across the town, and rumors floated about a large male polar bear spotted near the outskirts. Once again, Jonas joined the volunteer patrol to keep watchful eyes on the area. A deep calm settled in him as he realized this was becoming a calling, one that connected his past, his father's legacy, and a future built on stewardship. One evening, after a routine patrol, Jonas caught sight of shimmering lights dancing across the horizon, the aurora in all its glory, waves of greens and purples cascading across the sky. He stood in the crunchy snow, transfixed by the spectacle. He remembered the night he'd led the confused polar bear back to safety and how it had changed him in ways he still struggled to articulate. In that moment, Jonas felt a sweeping sense of gratitude to the bear, to the land, to the ancestors who first taught that humans and polar bears share a sacred kinship. He closed his eyes, inhaled the crisp air, and made a silent promise: whenever possible, he would protect these creatures and this land that shaped both man and bear. The memory of those wide, dark eyes, reflecting starlight, would forever remind him that every life has value, even one that roams a frozen world on the edge of survival. The story of the confused polar bear that wandered near the homes of Churchill, Manitoba, and the local man who guided it back to safety reminds us of the profound bonds that can form between humans and nature. In a landscape as unforgiving as the Arctic, compassion and empathy become lifelines not just for wild creatures, but for the people who share their realm. Jonas Harrington's quiet bravery stands as a testament to resilience, connection, and personal growth. Through courage and respect, he saved the bear from certain harm and rediscovered his own sense of purpose along the way. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey. If this story moved you, please show your support, like, share, and subscribe to help spread its message of harmony with nature. Together, we can inspire more tales of hope and stewardship, ensuring the Arctic remains a place where both man and bear can thrive.